to climb. So John, we're excited to have you and have the opportunity to get some of your insights today. From Soltis's side, we just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. We hope that you're all hanging in there and doing the very best you can, and obviously what are pretty difficult circumstances. As we sent out on the email and the invite, we were disappointed that we're not able to be together with you as we normally would be doing our fiduciary training today and tomorrow. But we were appreciative of Janice Henderson and John being willing to spend some time with us today. As many of you probably recall, John's been a keynote speaker at our conference before and has some unique insight into today's kind of circumstances and things that we're going through. So we're excited to take time with him today. We know that this is not the exact same type of experience that we get with the conference, and to that end, we are working and looking diligently towards the latter part of the year to see if we can we're hopeful that we'll be able to at the third or fourth quarter be able to provide some of the content that we had planned for this year's conference. So kind of stay tuned there, and we are hopeful that in the near future we'll get a chance to get together again and be with each of you. With that, I want to go ahead and just introduce John and today's topic. John has unique ability for insights into not only this pandemic. He's served as a FEMA crisis response professional, and he'll take a little bit of time talking about this pandemic that, of course, we're experiencing. But perhaps more important than that, of sharing with us some leadership abilities and things that he has learned over the years, certainly with his experience in the SEAL teams, about being a leader through times of chaos and times of crisis. And so John's, we promised John that we wouldn't go too lengthy on his bio, which is rather lengthy. So I'll do my very best, John, to summarize. But John began his career in the Naval Academy, graduated from history, and became a naval officer and a member of the SEAL teams or an officer in the SEAL teams, obviously completed SEAL team training and served there for 12 years. His SEAL teams, while he served, received numerous awards, including 3 Navy Unit Commendation Medals, 2 Meritorious Unit Commendation Medals, and including the Presidential Unit Citation, which is personally awarded to his SEAL team platoon by the President of the United States. John also has great educational academic background. He's got 2 MBAs, one from Columbia University with an emphasis in finance, and another one from the London School of Business with an emphasis in strategy. And so, John, we appreciate the service that you've rendered to our country. We appreciate you taking time with us this morning, and we are eager to hear from you. So with that, I will turn it over to John, and welcome again all that are on, and thank you, John, and we're excited to hear from you.
Okay, I do appreciate the introduction here. Let me see if I can switch over here to do the screen share, okay? So give me one moment. Hopefully, can everyone see that? I just want to check really quick before I start going right here.
We can see it, you're there.
All right, I like it. Okay, perfect. So here we go. So first of all, everyone, I appreciate you guys carving some time out to join us on the call today. I mean, obviously, to echo the comments, we'd prefer to be doing this in person with each of you, at the very least to marginalize some of the cabin fever that I'm sure has likely set in. Some of you have seen me present before. Before I start, just a quick word on the bios and resumes and whatever. You know that I'm not a particular fan of them. I mean, they're certainly necessary at times, but my general aversion to them is, their similarity to statistics in that, what they reveal is suggestive, but what they conceal is vital. With the bio, the narrative is literally 100% controlled by the author, and so it always materializes, as some extraordinary list of accolades and accomplishments, and that's fine, but, also knowing where people have skinned their knees or their proverbial knees is equally important, and too often it's unpacked away. So as I previously referenced to some of you before, when I talk about, for example, my time at the Naval Academy, when I can say that, I was an Academy Foundation Honor Scholar and part of the NCAA Division I water polo team, and one of the 16 selectees from a pool of 104 candidates to attend SEAL training. It's also probably more informative to tell you that I graduated 923 out of 957 in my class. I only played one season of water polo due to an unsatisfactory grade point average per NCAA standards, and I also stood 177 days of restriction for a whole variety of conduct offenses. It turned out that I'm not a big rule guy, which did not play particularly well at the Naval Academy. But I digress, and back to the topic at hand here. So here we are. It's the era of coronavirus. And to add a little levity to an otherwise serious situation, whoever said one person can't change the world, they clearly never ate an undercooked bat. Now, the concerns and the fears that are all manifesting for each of us at this time are fundamentally rooted, I believe, at the confluence of two key areas, and that's communication and experience. And I think it's important to take a few minutes here to unpack both of these. So I want to first address the communication side. All right. So demonstrably, a root cause of most problems in the world is bad or lack of sufficient communication. I think so. That's why George Bernard Shaw aptly pointed this out when, he wrote that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it is taking place. And that's why we've all sat in conference rooms and, at the end of the meeting, the manager says, so we're all good to go, right? And then, everybody nods in agreement. And once outside the door, we turn to our closest colleague and we say, what the heck are we supposed to be doing? And, even young children are intuitively aware of the power of communication. At times they manipulate it by employing the silent treatment, which is, obviously patently the lack of any communication, because intentionally or otherwise, what the silent treatment does is it stimulates the human tendency to first fill in the void, and then secondly, to do so by defaulting to whatever the worst case scenario is. And truth be told, even as adults, we're afflicted with this tendency. For example, let's take the innocuous text message that you send to a friend or colleague of yours that you haven't heard from in some time. And you write something like, hey, Mike, haven't caught up in a bit, would be great to chat. And then an hour goes by, there's no response, and now your thinking starts to devolve, and it does so at an exponential rate, right? So you first say to yourself, I wonder if my text message went through. Then a few hours later, now it's, how come Mike hasn't written me back? Is he angry with me about something? And then the next day, still with no response, now your thinking really starts to resort to, I wonder if Mike's still miffed with me about that argument from a few months ago. That's crazy. And then, a day later, it ends up with you kind of, what? I'm trying to communicate with Mike and he's being disrespectful and I'm not going to waste my time on him anymore. And then right about that time, lo and behold, your phone buzzes in and you receive a text message from Mike and it says something like, hey, buddy, just got your message. I've been on a backpacking trip the past couple days and, I've been out of cell coverage. Really great to hear from you. Let me know if you got some time to catch up this weekend. And, and then once again, balance is restored and all is right in the world. Okay. And if I use the SEAL teams as a benchmark for an optimal performing entity, given that they do have to operate with virtually no margin of error, because every so-called game that they play is an away game. Each SEAL platoon during the standard 18-month training cycle, which is represented up here above, they spend the very, very first 2 months, 60 days straight on the communications block of training. And the reason why they do that, first of all, SEALs, they hate it. And it's because you're not diving or jumping out of airplanes or everything. That's not relevant. The reason why they spend the very first 2 months straight on communication is because the efficiency and effectiveness of everything else that they do is predicated on them getting the communications portion correct. And the mantra is called artful communication, meaning that they learn to communicate anything that they pass or say. It must be accurate, it must be relevant, and it must be timely, hence ART. Now, the current and ongoing communication issue is certainly exacerbated by the media, all right? And right now, in this period of time, we are so inundated with gobs of information that's readily accessible at our fingertips 24 hours a day that it really does raise everyone's stress levels, and therein confusion manifests, certainly frustration, and perhaps even panic at times. Now, I'm not here to demonize the media, all right? And frankly, I think that they do that well enough on their own. But I think it's important to reaffirm a few, absolute objective statements of fact, okay? First and foremost, media outlets, they are in fact for-profit businesses. And in this day and age of 24/7 coverage, in order to maintain that stickiness, they do have to provide ongoing and sensationalized information. If they report boring stuff in a boring manner, folks just click somewhere else with the smallest flick of their finger. And that's why you can write the script on conversations that are taking between editors and program managers and stuff when they're saying, no, don't say that the number of positive virus cases has increased. That's too passive a word. Like, be sure you use the word surged or dramatically climbed, because it'll keep people on the hook. And also, while you're at it, don't add too much commentary on the fact that, the number of positive cases has increased is also because the number of tests being performed has also gone up. That's too linear. It makes too much sense. So the media absolutely has to sensationalize. I mean, by their very nature, they report one plane crash, not the 3 million plane landings. And it's why on live television, you'll continue to see that, these media outlets report that enough test kits aren't available, but then they'll relegate to the fourth page on their website, meaning the place that nobody reads, the fact that LabCorp, it now scaled to performing 20,000 virus tests per day, and Quest Diagnostics just recently scaled to 25,000 tests per day at each of their 3 lab locations. So point being is that, with this ongoing communication problem, nobody really knows what's fact, what's fiction, what is editorialized, and what is sensationalized. Now, a few weeks ago, you may recall that information, and I use that term very lightly, it was spread that ibuprofen was likely exacerbating people's exposure to the coronavirus. Caused everybody to, make a run on their medicine cabinets and throw away Advil bottles and make a run on Tylenol. Well, a recently released article sums up the overarching issue that I'm talking about. And the title of it is, the ibuprofen debate reveals the danger of COVID-19 rumors. I think it's important to read the short opening paragraph here. And it says, an online furor over whether it's safe to use the fever reducer reveals how people are sharing incomplete and sometimes bad information. That the advice against ibuprofen got circulated at all is a study in good intentions, complicated by biases and possibly by misinformation as well. It showcases how the stress of a global pandemic is causing bad and incomplete information to rise as people rush to deploy whatever protections might be available, end quote. So frankly, I think that's about as good a summation as one can get on this. So the purpose here today is to relieve some frustration by clearly and objectively articulating facts about the ongoing processes regarding coronavirus mitigation measures. Now, the second prong that I referenced is experience. And our experiences provide us a vast degree of ease in our lives, most profoundly in times of crisis. And we really do take the concept of experience for granted. And, for a moment here, just think of the significance that experience plays for each of you. I mean, lack of experience, it's what terrifies new parents as they're shuffled out of the hospital and sent home with their very first infant newborn, that causes them to run to the baby's crib every time that, the baby so much as moves a limb in the night. But if you fast forward to, the couple's third child, somehow it's now okay for baby number 3 to juggle knives, okay? It's why we pay experiences, why we pay premiums for attorneys who have practiced their professions for decades. It's why the survivability metrics of military personnel in combat zones, it's literally exponential as one moves from their first overseas deployment to the second, to the third, and on and on. Now, the current issue vis-a-vis the coronavirus is glaringly obvious. There is literally no one who has any granular experience regarding this particular virus, COVID-19, at this particular scale, global. So here we have this awful confluence, which is not particularly great communication that is coupled with a perceived lack of experience. And together, this is a superb recipe for unbridled insanity. So what does all this mean? Yes, the amount of information being thrown about is mind-boggling. Yes, it's difficult to separate fact from sensationalized information. And yes, no one has any experience with this particular virus at this particular scale. But this does not mean that there are not very robust organizations, processes, and people in place who are actively and effectively addressing the coronavirus pandemic, because they are. And frankly, just as a side note on the experience piece, if experience were required for, one-to-one experience was required for everything, we never would have put the first person on the moon. So I want to shift rudders here to strategic and tactical level engagements. So first of all, at a strategic level, in the United States, we have what is called the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, or the NIPP. And it was first developed in 2005. And the purpose of the NIPP is to protect critical infrastructure, key resources, and to ensure resiliency in the United States. To sum up what the NIPP really is, it's the governing document for developing coordination between the government and the private sector to protect all of our critical infrastructure. And it does this by creating partnerships between what are called government coordinating councils, which are from the public sector, and then sector coordinating councils, which are from the private sector. And it does this for each of these 16 sectors that the Department of Homeland Security has identified as critical. You can see them all up on the screen right there, but for those that aren't on screen right now, it's like food and agriculture, financial services, energy, communications, water systems, so on. Now, obviously, the relevant sector right now is the public health and healthcare. So that everybody knows, there are currently 266 private sector entities that range from the American Medical Association to Wellstar Health that are part of this particular sector coordinating council. There are 14 governmental entities that are part of it, which includes the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of the Interior, State Department, Defense Department, Homeland Security, FDA, so on. I mean, if you'd like, you can openly see everything going on in this particular sector right now at healthsectorcouncil.org. Now, my point here is that every day, our taxpayer dollars subsidize millions of government employees at the Treasury Department, at Department of Health and Human Services, and Energy, and Department of Agriculture, and on, who literally spend the entirety of their professional lives designing and developing courses of action to protect our country's infrastructure from terrorist attacks and viruses and transportation issues and energy disruptions and on and on and on. So contrary to the current perception that the world is spinning off axis, that our government has no plan at all, everything is reactive, and we're really all just kind of ignorantly dancing on the deck of the Titanic. And again, this is all largely perpetuated by the sensationalized media. It's just not true. And allow me to reference a few rudimentary examples here. So first and foremost, there's a long-standing presidentially appointed cabinet position. The title of it is the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response at the Department of Health and Human Services. And by law, this very office leads the nation in, and I quote, preventing, responding to, and recovering from the adverse health effects of man-made and naturally occurring disasters and public health emergencies, end quote. So this position is currently held by Dr. Robert Kadlec. He's an Air Force Academy graduate, has his MD from USIS, a master's in national security studies from Georgetown. I mean, heck, he was named Flight Surgeon of the Year in 1986. I mean, my point here is that, this is not staffed by stupid people. But the broader point is that there's an exact individual and an associated office whose sole professional purpose through many administrations is to lead and choreograph critical healthcare responses. Now, example number two, if I use logic syntax, if not but for the government's travel restrictions, border closures, and social distancing requests, the number of positive coronavirus cases in the U.S. would currently be in excess of 10 million. Now, obviously, the difficulty here is that one's relegated to proving negative, but these models do work both ways, all right? Number three, third example, so this is why the executive branch recently enacted the Defense Production Act. And again, it was only enacted for the procurement of virus test kits, as well as the personal protective equipment, including masks, face shields, ventilators, and other necessary items. Pardon me. Now, I believe that this is an area that the broader media is actually really being quite awful about, and that's outlet agnostic. The DPA, there's not an insignificant portion of the population that believes that the DPA somehow allows the government to nationalize private industry in some type of Stalin-esque way. That's absolutely not the case. All the Defense Production Act does is it compels private industry to sell certain designated materials to the government first. I mean, equally important, it allows the executive branch to impose wage and price controls so that subsequent price gouging doesn't materialize. So we don't end up paying, $500 for a roll of toilet paper. Now, the reason why the executive branch didn't institute the DPA until March, notwithstanding the fact that February was largely a data compilation time period, an information gathering period, but it also wasn't necessary. All private sector entities that were manufacturing necessary materials, they were already providing them to the government first anyhow. So what the president really did most recently under the DPA was to use an aspect of it to force industry to expand production and the supply of necessary resources, basically just getting them to push scale. So strategically speaking, the point I'm making is that there's a very robust program and sub-programs that is inclusive of the right people and the right processes that are addressing the virus issue, all right? Now, granted, like looking at the screen, we are talking about the government here, and there's no legitimate government anywhere. I mean, at least forthright and legitimate government, except, delusional North Korea. There's no government that has ever honestly claimed that it is efficient at what it does. Governments really just ultimately claim that they get a job done. So no doubt that we can and we should be all collectively vexed with the lack of efficiency that we see, whether it's response times or information flow or supply chain and so on. And it's good. I mean, our so-called anger, our frustration is what keeps the government on their toes. But please do not believe for a second that the powers that be are just randomly running around in some Keystone Cops type of a nightmare, because it's just not the case, all right? So, in the end, it's always the same pain that the government bureaucracies wield. Now, I want to shift here to the tactical level and shed a little light on exactly what's going on. So first of all, in the context of today's call, the term safety and security, they are interchangeable. I mean, if you're safe, then you're secure. If you're secure, then you're safe, vice versa, okay? Now, safety and security at its very, very core is what is established through a long-standing set of principles called the 4Ds. All right, and the 4Ds were developed first by Sandia National Laboratories in the 1960s. So what I want to do is everybody imagine 4 concentric circles with you at the very center of all of them. For those of you that aren't seeing visual slides, it might be easier to envision the planet Earth with you standing on it, and there's 4 moons orbiting around it, and each moon is 100 miles larger orbit than the next one, okay? So the 4Ds, starting from the outermost circle or orbit and moving inward, are as follows: deter, detect, delay, and defend. And these 4 regions are referred to collectively as defense in depth. And deterrence is the very first line of defense, the outermost ring. And if you think about it conceptually in the physical security space, deterrence is it's the signage that you put on your house stating that your property is monitored by a 24/7 alarm system. Fundamentally, it's about deterring any nefarious actor from viewing your asset as kind of low-hanging fruit, all right? Now, the next circle is detection. Using this example again, it's the notification system that something isn't, that something is abnormal, right? A motion detection light that comes on, a ring notification on your phone that someone is approaching the door. I think you get the general idea there, right? Delay is the third layer. It's having good locks on your doors. It's having your valuables put away and not stored out on your kitchen counter at night. I mean, conceptually, what the delay piece about, it's about delaying a perpetrator from easily consummating their act. And then, of course, the final layer is defense. And in today's day and age, from a security perspective, this is typically calling 911. However, this is also largely predicated on whatever your personal degree of comfortability is with interacting with an issue or a perpetrator. I mean, if you're an EMT, obviously you have a blocked skill set where you have an ability to address many things that don't necessitate you having to dial 911. I mean, similarly, my wife, Tammy, is a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy, a former Marine Corps officer, and, with combat tours in Iraq. If somebody breaks into our house, we are not calling 911. I'm quite certain that we can address the issue ourselves. But anyhow, back to the 4Ds. What you are seeing right now regarding the coronavirus mitigation measures is quite literally in lockstep with the 4Ds. Number one, deterrence. Deter the virus from additional entry points by closing down the borders, restricting travel first from Asia, then soon after from Europe, and then it was reducing inter and intrastate travel mediums, all right? Number two is detection. Clearly, this is identifying the centers of activity. So initially, this was Washington State, then it was New York, then California. Now you're seeing the secondary locations on Bloom, which include, Chicago, South Florida, New Orleans. Certainly, detection is actually the detection of the virus through the procurement and deployment of testing kits. Now, number three, the third layer is delay, to delay the spread of the disease. And this is the sole purpose of social distancing. And what is really amazing to me is that there is a not insignificant portion of the population who does believe in a very conspiracy theory-oriented way that the purpose of social distancing is really kind of subplot of the government to, remove all of our civil liberties, or that, it's also the manifestation of the government has no idea what they're doing and they just need everybody to kind of be quiet and sit in your homes and while they try to figure out what's going on. And that's absolutely not the case. I mean, social distancing is to delay and to deny the spread of the virus for three reasons. It's so that centers of activity can be controlled. It's so that detection capabilities can reach scale. And three, it's so that the healthcare system isn't overburdened with those adversely affected. And certainly, so that it's not overburdened because Chaz and Lyndon end up contracting the virus and they've taken away 2 tests and 2 hospital beds and 2 ventilators because, they just had to blow off steam from their really tough spring semester and they really just needed to go do keg stands with all their frat brothers in Daytona Beach, all right? I digress on that point. And then the number 4th circle, the defense. And certainly the consummation of this will be the development of a vaccine, which is being worked on by dozens of public and private organizations. But more likely in the short term, it will be the development of a specific treatment regimen. So that everybody knows for your essay or your situational awareness, there are currently 78 vaccine projects that are launched around the world. 37 of them are in full-scale development, and 5 are currently in human clinical trials. There are also 23 treatments that are currently in human clinical trials. So really to wrap this up, what the defense portion is, it's really the ongoing and the concurrent engagement of all of the 3 other circles you see out there, right? Increased testing capabilities for more accurate data, delaying the spread by social distancing, thereby decreasing the strain on the healthcare system while increasing the time to develop a vaccine or treatment. So in a nutshell, that's what's really going on right now. As I've already stated, it's not a frenetic free fall. It's really a very stepped process that purposely and intentionally has flexibility and pivot points built into it because these types of environments are constantly evolving. And again, this is all despite what the media is largely conveying. Now, certainly the one thing that is still outstanding that I think is the fundamental source of consternation for most people right now is the absence of a specific timetable. And culturally, we're all highly attuned to schedules, due dates, deadlines, meeting times, on and on. We really do not do particularly well without scheduling. I mean, if I were to kind of make a really silly example, but to paint a picture here. So let's take SEAL training. It's known as BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. The proverbial they refer to it as the most difficult military training in the world. So for the sake of argument, let's say that SEAL training started on some random, arbitrary, and unknown date. I mean, literally like where a van pulls up in front of your house, yanks you off the porch and says, "Welcome to SEAL training," okay? But moreover, that there was no known end to it, like no finish line, no graduation date. It started. I mean, if that were the case, there would be exactly none SEALs ever because no one is going through the awfulness of that particular evolution indefinitely. But knowing that it's 26 weeks long, it's an entirely different game. It provides a goalpost, an end state. And most people can endure trying times so long as they have some general idea of when it will be over. Now, at this particular moment, we don't have that luxury quite yet, but I stress yet. And it's yet just because the data and the necessary associated analytics are just not there yet. I mean, there are critical things that we do not yet know. I mean, does the virus die off in warmer weather? are people who have recovered, immune from getting the virus again? How about what size of the population actually has the virus and is asymptomatic or manifesting less acute symptoms? I mean, these are critical data points to know. And to know for obvious reasons, but also because prematurely loosening up some of the more draconian measures that we're all contending with right now, I mean, let's just say it's not easy to put that particular genie back in the bottle. But herein lies the overarching question, right? What is the tipping point where efforts that benefit the medical aspects are concurrently causing when do they cause irreparable damage to the economy? And again, this is all further exacerbated by our societal makeup. I mean, we do want things, we want them right now. We're a society of fast food and ATMs and next day delivery and high-speed internet, and we just really do not do well having to wait. And in times like these, patience truly is a virtue. So as we're asking ourselves the question, how long are we going to be sequestered in our homes? I mean, is it July 1st, August 15th, Halloween? Like, what is it? And the powers that be, the politicians, they're quite cognizant of this concern, which is why, the White House initially put out its campaign called 15 Days to Slow the Spread, because they know that they have to provide a timetable, and they are working on it. In both states are working on it, even counties are working on it, and we will get to this, all right? But you got to have the information. So what are the pundits doing out there? They're saying what's the best that we can do at a time like this is to look at other areas that are ahead of the nominal curve. Personally, I don't think that we really can do that. You can't take Italy, for example, and use it as an overlay in the United States, because the social and the demographics of Italy, there really is no one-to-one place that you can put an overlay in the United States. I mean, no different than like you can't put an overlay in Salt Lake City that you can in Manhattan or Miami Beach. The nuances are just different. Then, of course, the flip side to that is you also, have the folks saying, well, let's look at China. What about China? This is purely subjective, but my point on that is I would be exceptionally wary, frankly, of any information ever that comes from China. The Chinese Communist Party is an egomaniacal, sociopathic government that is obsessed with how it is perceived on the world stage. So they literally just make things up to make themselves look better. So I wouldn't trust them. But our own data, our own information is coming in inbound. So lastly, I just want to take 30 seconds here to briefly address the concerns around, food, like our staples, food, water, shelter, and apparently toilet paper now, which is manifesting itself in the form of hoarding. We are not contending with a famine or the absence of food stores. What we are contending with, or most of us, is just really a supply chain bottleneck. And supply chains are in the process of shifting accordingly, and they're very adept at doing this. I mean, the same number of mouths to feed are still out there. The difference is just where they're being fed is what has shifted. Children are not receiving anywhere from 1 to 3 meals a day at school, and they're therefore being fed at home. Likewise, people aren't patronizing restaurants and instead are eating at home. So this has just created short-term shortages at grocery stores, but the same amount of food is being grown by farmers and moved by truckers. The difference is just the B2B supply chain, whereby food that's normally delivered to restaurants, it's in the process of being shifted to grocery stores. So point is that there's plenty of food, plenty of water, and there's certainly no need to hoard the toilet paper. So in conclusion, to kind of wrap all this up, at the expense of sounding cliched, but we are definitely living in some interesting times. I promise you that no one is sitting around saying to themselves, what else can we do to string this out and, make it more burdensome for Americans and businesses and, so that we can really damage the economy and our way of life? I mean, to the contrary, what you're actually witnessing is the very opposite of that. It's just hard to see it through all of the other white noise that's out there. So 3 kind of takeaways, stop spreading the virus, stay at home. 2, stop spreading the panic. Don't resend that text or link unless it's verified and necessary. And 3, stay informed but not glued to the news, because nothing beneficial ever comes from that. And remember that this too shall pass. So, I hope that you all have a fantastic week. And in the prophetic words of the SEAL team motto, which could not be any more apropos than nowadays, just remember that the only easy day was yesterday. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to any questions or commentary I might be able to address.
John, thank you for sharing those insights. We've got a few questions that have come in. For those of you that are, we've got a few minutes here that John's willing to take questions. And so we've got a couple that are here. For those of you that may want to ask a question, if you're logged in online, there's a Q&A, and you can ask a question there, send that through, and that will come through, and then we'll go ahead and ask it. We'll try and get to a few, knowing that we've got a timeline to keep to as well. So maybe the first one, John, and you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you were to give a grade to our government response to this pandemic, just here in the U.S., based on some of your comments and your experience, I know that's, but what type of grade would you give to our government based on this response, and both early on and where we currently sit?
All right, so, it's very hard to answer that question. I can give you kind of what would be my political diplomatic answer, and then I can give you what my real answer is. My gut is that I'm probably being asked to give the latter and not the former. But what's beneficial is that I think that they're both pretty much one and the same. I think, and by the way, just for the record, so that everybody is aware of this, so I voted for I voted for no one in the last presidential election. The first time since I could vote, since I was 18 years old, that I chose to exercise my right not to vote for anyone, because I thought that both candidates were equally awful in order to rise to the presidential position. So that being said, I'm not waving anyone's particular banner on one side or the other. That being said, I think that the government has responded. I think it did, relatively speaking, a pretty darn good job. Now, efficiencies always need to improve. The decisions that we make in our lives, unless they are just random and snapshot, are predicated and are only as good as the information that we have. And it is demonstrable and it is unarguable that China flat out lied. They flat out lied to the World Health Organization. They flat out lied to other countries that had represented concerns about this. And data does not lie. There were only 102 confirmed cases in the United States the first week in March. If we had tried to interact and engage social distancing in these more draconian measures that we're undergoing right now, without any type of proof, right? I mean, our society wants empirical proof of the existence of God, of the missing link, of everything else. And in the absence of it, they will not concede to anything else. So it doesn't matter. You would have been damned if you do and damned if you don't. So, and February was really, it is an information gathering stage. I think that the federal government, sure, it could have been a little quicker in closing down the borders. It would have just delayed for a bit longer. It would not have denied the spread of the disease, all right? So I think that all in all, they're doing pretty well. I think that we are undergoing an extraordinary lesson right here in U.S. history in observing exactly the powers that are and should be manifested at the respective state levels. I mean, we are the United States of America. We're not the Republic of America, okay? And so the states, the respective governors and the respective counties are the ones who need to make the decisions. They're the ones that are responsible at the county level for the healthcare engagements. And so I think that is a wise run for this to happen. I mean, again, I think all in all, just imagine if this argument had been, if we go back to 120 days ago, and this is a political comment right here, 120 days ago, we are big. There are two sides of the spectrum. One is arguing for the need for a wall on the southern border, all right? And the flip side to that is you have folks that are arguing the need for the Green New Deal, all right? And nobody is meeting in the middle between these two different kind of run-ups of what they're talking about. If you had injected a third kind of requirement at that point in time and said, by the way, while you guys are talking about southern border walls and Green New Deal efforts, I think that we all should also allocate $2 or $3 billion to research for pandemic response procedures and stuff. You would have been laughed at. It would have been asinine. Why not allocate another $2 or $3 billion to NASA in order to contend with the global asteroid Earth killer that might be coming? So it's very easy to armchair quarterback afterwards. I think that all in all, I think that the response has been fairly decent with what the knowledge, what the information is that we had. I hope that answered the question.
That's appreciate the response, John. The next one coming in, it's kind of a couple of questions submitted that tend to do with two things. You talked about communication and how important that is and how that's drilled into SEAL teams so that they can operate efficiently. Can you talk about, obviously we've got a significant number of businesses where, in terms of working remotely, can you talk maybe about how to ensure that communication is flowing freely in that case? And then the second part of the question is, in those scenarios or when we have these times, also process for being able to make good, sound decisions when there's chaos and so much noise that's around us.
Yes, absolutely. So again, I go back to, in the Teams presentation that I was fortunate enough to deliver to you folks before, and in today, you can understand that the theme, I cannot overstate enough that the root cause of virtually every problem in the world is bad, lack of, or inaccurate information. All right, and communication is critical. And as we are working from home, as we are socially distanced, as we are remote, the importance of communication and what they call in the SEAL teams is establishing the cadence and the battle rhythm. You must establish, just like children, they very much crave kind of, consistency and repetition. You must also do that in and amongst yourselves. You must establish, now, what works for one doesn't work necessarily for another. You need to figure that out with what your respective cultures are, what you're trying to establish. But, having a wrap up, a start of the week meeting at 8 a.m. on Monday, having an end of the day, a call in at another point in time. I would also say it's also key to make use of the technology you have available to you, which is to get a face-to-face. So via WebEx, as opposed to just a conference call in, is good to do at least once a week so people can see each other, which is, creates a great degree of comfortability right there. Because the way that the world is operating right now is very much like the way a broader SEAL team does, which is instead of being very hierarchical and existing in one single location, one single office space, the SEAL teams operate by a hub and spoke. So if you think about it, you always have your headquarters element, which is right at the hub of the wheel. And then you have these different spokes that run off of it, and they act as little kind of their own micro corporations, their own micro solely powered entities. But they always refer back, they all tether back to the headquarters element. So you must establish, there is no SEAL team, like Echo Platoon from SEAL Team 3 is not just sitting out in Afghanistan and doesn't have any connectivity with its headquarters element for 3 weeks, and just says, yeah, go there and just go do your thing. Think about what their communication is, like hourly, bi-week, daily, what it is back with headquarters elements and other entities. It's not just to maintain what is it that you're doing. It's a safety, security, it's a cultural piece on that. So I know that's somewhat convoluted, but hopefully that broadly answered at least some of the questions, Steve.
Yeah, and then that's maybe a quick follow-up there, John, is you mentioned kind of a bi-daily or even more frequent, but maybe if you don't mind, maybe diving a little bit deeper on how frequently and in terms of being able to huddle and do that from when there's that remote dynamic that's there.
Yeah, so the issue, Travis, that I haven't responded to that is that is entirely predicated on the nuances and the engagement activity of what it is. You can't say we need to huddle up once a day. Or, there are some entities, look, if you are a UI UX developer web developer, and you're, talking about 6 different engineers that are all creating stuff on a team, they may have to huddle up hourly as they're unpacking different data and working towards things together. If you're the C-suite, you may have to do it once a day at the end of the day, or once a week, or something like that. It really has to be determined, because there's a fine line. You can also just set up programmatic, like, kind of connectivity, and then it becomes like Chicken Little. The sky is falling. Oh yeah, I got to go plug into this conference call again where nothing is passed, and it just kind of sucks up 30 minutes of my time right here. You don't want it to devolve into that either. So you need to figure out what's best. Now, what is the best way to figure that out? It's to ask everyone on the team. It's to ask everyone on the team and then find the happy medium right there. So as awful as that may sound, like as being the nominal head, and being like, well, that's going to be, the inmates running the prison and stuff. Well, if you want to get actual buy-in, if you want it to work this way, then you do need to get the buy-in from the majority right here to find out what is the tempo, what is the battle rhythm that will be most effective and efficient for all parties.
And then maybe just time for one last question, John. I know we're running up against our time limit. The last one is, obviously, you've got a number of, I think most that are here on the line that are leaders within their organizations. They've been faced with, we've all been faced with making decisions and having to do so quickly. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? I'm sure, obviously, the SEAL teams are a great example of being able to make sure that you can make decisions quickly in times of crisis and stress, and make sure that your process is one that those decisions can be sound and driven correctly.
Yeah, I think that my answer is not going to be very well received on this one at this particular point in time, but I'm going to answer it this way nonetheless. This goes back to, one of the other principles that I talk about, which is about training and practice. And you may recall that, I presented to you once before that there is this long-held global belief out there that we've all heard that, under pressure, people rise to the occasion, or in a critical incident, people rise to the occasion. And I will again tell you once again that under pressure in crisis modes, most people do not actually rise to the occasion. But what all people do is they do compress to the level of their training or their experience, okay? Because you may not have one-to-one experience, but you can train for these types of things. So I think what the current environment does is really shining a light on one of the other aspects, that we've just talked about and discussed before, that I think is highly applicable from the SEAL teams, is that as everybody gets to take a breather, gets to kind of understand what's going on, and then reset and look at what's happening, you do spend, a quarter of your time focusing on what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, constant improvements. But you do need to focus. I mean, in the SEAL teams, they spend 75% of the time, remember, focusing, planning, and training for not what are they going to do, but what are they going to do if. Because those are the things that you do not directly or proximally control. It helps you inoculate yourself from stress. It helps you lower your, proverbial heart rate and blood pressure when it comes to kind of crisis times, that allows you to make very, very solid, sound decisions. I mean, a great way to look at this is if you take a emergency room trauma surgeon and you take a general family practitioner. I mean, both are board certified, lettered MDs. All right. They really cannot swap and do each other's jobs. They really can't. You can't take just a family practitioner and put them in as an emergency room trauma surgeon. All right. That doesn't mean that they can't be trained to do each other's jobs. They certainly can, because I mean, they're both dog MDs. All right. But the line is different, the stress inoculation components. So I would say it's just important to be able to use this going forward. Spend more time focusing on what you were going to do, what are the continuity of operations, what are the plans and processes, and how do you go through these types of things so that you and your employees are, quote unquote, inoculated when kind of the global, heart rate increases. Okay?
John, thank you again for taking the time with us today. We appreciate your insights, appreciate your experience, and the perspective that you've brought. Again, Riley and Janice Henderson, we thank you both for working with us to be able to connect with John today. And again, John, we want to thank you. I think collectively, I know that you've given great service to our country and in our military arm, and we appreciate the service that you've given, and again, appreciate the time today. We thank everybody for joining. We hope that you've been able to get a lot out of John's comments today. We hope that you're all staying healthy and safe, and we look forward to days sooner rather than later when we'll be able to be together again and continue our efforts as fiduciaries on your plans and for your many employees. Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.